from different towns who could not establish if they were Jewish. So that's a pretty serious problem. Don't even know if you're Jewish, because they didn't have an unbroken family tree, and there was intermarriage and the like. And now, as I say, if in many, many ways, if your only problem is you're not Jewish, that's a solvable problem by conversion. But in order to do conversion, you have to accept the mitzvah. So a person who doesn't know, if we don't know if he's Jewish and he's not willing to accept the mitzvahs, unfortunately, there's no particular conversion that you can do. Now, historically, usually if somebody said they were Jewish, that was perfectly fine because people didn't have any incentive to lie. Why would I say I'm Jewish if I'm not Jewish? But the truth of the matter is, in recent decades, this is more and more of a problem, primarily because the Reform movement redefined what it means to be Jewish. And that is, as you know, under classical halacha, Judaism is defined exclusively by the mother. There is literally no such concept in halacha as being a half Jew. If your mother is Jewish, you are 100% Jewish. If your mother is not Jewish, you are 100% not Jewish. So if you have a Jewish father, you're not Jewish. There may be an Indian to be makarev of such a person, to be a little more proactive in encouraging conversion, but without a conversion, he's not Jewish. Now, the Reform movement around, 30, 35 years ago, adopted an alternative definition of Judaism, which allows patrilineal descent, meaning they consider a person Jewish if the father is Jewish. So that actually means there are quite a few people who consider themselves Jews from the moment of, these are not conversions, they consider themselves Jews from the moment of birth because their father is Jewish, when in fact, halakhically, they're not Jewish. So as more and more intermingle with the general Jewish population, there can be serious issues if somebody is Jewish. So as I say, if they are religious, so these problems can be surmounted by a gior l'chumra. If they're not religious, you really cannot solve the problem this way. Now, this is independent from a Reform conversion. A Reform conversion is also invalid, but this is a different problem. This is a problem with the very definition of patrilineal descent. In fact, it's interesting, the Reform movement's claim is, it's interesting that we're looking at the book of Ezra, they claim that matrilineal descent was invented by Ezra. We'll see at the end of the book. Our understanding is the other way around. Ezra did not invent halacha. Ezra was simply following the well-established halacha that already existed. Yeah. As far as I know, the conservative movement still subscribes to matrilineal descent, but they do their own conversions. So conversions are going to be a problem, but not patrilineal versus matrilineal. Now, it is interesting, though, that there's a Ramban in Chumash, a very fascinating Ramban. This is just a digression for a moment. Do you remember a few weeks ago in Parshas Emor, we read about the person who blasphemed. He was the son of a Jewish woman and an Egyptian father, and he cursed God, blasphemy, and Moshe Rabbeinu did not know what the punishment was for that. So he asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu said the punishment is to be stoned. So the Ramban focuses on this question, which is a question that comes up a few times, and that is, if Hashem gave Moshe all of the mitzvos on Har Sinai, then how could it be that Moshe doesn't know what the halacha is later? Wasn't he already given that halacha? So the Ramban brings a very, very fascinating lamdasha cheshbon here. And that is, Moshe knows from Sinai that if a Jewish person curses Hashem, the punishment is skila. But Moshe does not know if this person is Jewish or not, because although his mother is Jewish and his father is not, the Ramban actually says before Matan Torah, your yichus to Klal Yisrael depended on your father, just like by the Shvatim. So before Matan Torah, Jewish status was based on the father. After Matan Torah, It's based on the mother. So Moshe was mesupak about the status of somebody who was born before Matan Torah, and now it's after Matan Torah. Because here's the thing. If we apply the pre-Matan Torah rules, the guy is a guy because his father is Egyptian. Now, you're still chayav misa because one of the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach is a prohibition against blasphemy. But the Noachite punishment for blasphemy, like all Noachite violations, is decapitation. So Moshe knows a guy gets decapitation, a Jew gets stoning, but Moshe Rabbeinu's uncertainty is this guy a Jew under the post-Matan Torah rules? Or is he a guy under the pre-Matan Torah rules? So there is some truth. Every sheker has truth in it. When the Reform movement says matrilineal descent is an innovation, and it was not the original halacha, they are correct in a limited sense. It's an innovation from Har Sinai. That the original pre-Har Sinai halacha was patrilineal. That's a very interesting point. It reminds me a little bit of a story that somebody went to Yitzchok, was one of the great Gedolim of the 19th century, and said, why are you Orthodox Jews? You're so old-fashioned. Why don't you go with the times? Why do you keep on holding the old customs that don't have relevance today? So Yitzchok said, you are the old-timers. You are the ones that are retrogressive. So the person says, how's that? He says, because it says in the Haggadah, originally we were idol worshippers. So you go back to the older history of the Jewish people. We go back to the newer ones. So matrilineal descent is an innovation, but it's an innovation from Har Sinai. Yeah.
So does the Reform movement cancel out the matrilineal, or they add patrilineal?
Oh no, they added. They didn't cancel out. They say if either parent is Jewish, the person is Jewish by birth and not Jewish by conversion. And you see, that's potentially a much more serious problem because conversions can be monitored. If you're dating somebody who was converted, you can see a document. So if you see it's a Reform conversion, it's not good. But the issue of people who simply say they were born Jews. So most of the time, you don't ask any questions after that. You're born Jewish, so that's great. And yet, under the Reform definition, born Jew can actually be a false statement because they do follow patrilineal descent. So in many ways, patrilineal descent is a bigger problem than the problem of conversions.
I always wondered, why don't we have Shivas just dip in the mikvah, just in case?
Well, you could. Sometimes there's not. Not every case is going to be a problem. There are cases where you don't have a problem, but okay. You're suggesting that just to avoid any type of possible doubt. But of course, that could only be after the person is totally committed, meaning if he's the process and he's not yet sure, he could not go to the mikveh that way. By the way, there is not for your reason. Your reason is because in case he might be a guy, but there actually is makairos that any Baal Tshuva should go to the mikveh as a way of part of his tshuva and part of his renewal. This was an issue during the Crusades, and this is a part of Jewish history that's not always so pleasant. Although many Jews died al Kiddush Hashem, they were killed, tortured and killed. There were many Jews who also converted. Under fear of death, they converted to Christianity. And there are many men, including the sons of some great Rishonim. I don't want to mention the names, but there were children of great Rishonim who converted to Christianity under fear of life, fear of losing their lives. And there are many tshuvos about what you might call reentry procedures. If these guys want to do tshuva, what do they have to go through? And going to the mikveh was one of the rituals that was often suggested for people who were coming back to Judaism. Yeah.
In that case, with a male Baal Tshuva, would it be better for them to go to the ocean rather than a men's mikvah? that in mind that they wanted to dunk?
In terms of fulfilling idea of tevilah?
Yeah.
Well, I tell you the problem. I mean, the problem basically is that if you're doing it because it's a suffix of conversion, it would have to be done in front of a Beis Din. So if you can get 3 rabbis to come to the ocean, that would be fine. But you can't just do it yourself. It would have to be in front of a Beis Din. It's part of a conversion. Yeah.
If somebody had done Kehillas before and then reconverted to another religion and wanted to come back, they wouldn't have to.
Yeah. So Judaism is halachically a one-way street. You can become Jewish, but you cannot leave Judaism. So whether you're a born Jew or whether you're a converted Jew, if you convert to another religion, in the eyes of the Torah, you are still Jewish. You are still Jewish. It's impossible for a Jew to become a Christian. You might believe in Christianity, and that would be very sad, but you're not Christian. Now, this is an interesting point where the secular law of Israel is more machmir than halacha. There was a famous case, I think it's the 1960s. It's called the Brother Daniel case. You can Google this. It's a famous case. This involved under the law of Israel, the first law of the Medinat Yisrael in 1948 is called the law of return. And the law of return basically says anyone that is Jewish is entitled to automatic citizenship in the state of Israel. Okay, that's the very first law of return. So there was a Jewish guy, who converted to Catholicism, and he became a monk. It's called Brother Daniel. And he wanted to emigrate to Israel and claim automatic citizenship under the law of return. Now, if this would have been a halachic issue, that would have been pretty simple. Brother Daniel is a Jew. But the law of return is a secular law, so interestingly enough, the Supreme Court of Israel said a Jew who converts to another religion is no longer a Jew for the purposes of automatic citizenship of the law of return, and he has to apply like any non-Jew for naturalization and citizenship. So this is fascinating. If you're an atheist, if you don't believe in God, if you desecrate Shabbos, if you violate kashrus, of course you're a Jew for purposes of the law of return. But if you convert to Christianity, in the eyes of the secular law of the Knesset, you are not Jewish. Now, in some ways, I think that doesn't make any sense. Why is an atheist more of a Jew than a Christian? Okay, be it as it may, this is not relevant halachically, meaning I'm just telling you this in terms of the secular law of return and the Brother Daniel case. Halachically, a Jew who, God forbid, converts to Christianity is absolutely a Jew, but the medieval tshuvos and after the Crusades did talk about a reentry procedure, a part of which may involve going to the mikveh. Not because it's conversion, but simply was part of renouncing your past and recommitting to the path of Judaism. Yeah.
So this re-entry process would not strip you of your yichus during Kohen?
That's correct. You would still be a Kohen. In fact, it's interesting. The laws of again, forgive me for the digressions, but the halachic questions are interesting. Let me give you 2 examples of a Kohen for a moment. Example number 1 is a Kohen marries a woman he's not allowed to marry. A Kohen marries a divorced woman. A Kohen marries a Gioris. So the halacha is, as soon as he marries a prohibited marriage, he is no longer allowed to exercise any of the honors of a Kohen. He's not called up to the Torah first. He cannot duchen. He cannot say Birkas Kohanim. So he will not be able to be restored to kahuna until 2 things have to happen. Number 1, he must divorce this woman or she dies. But number 2, there's an interesting procedure. He must make a public neder that he will never marry a forbidden woman again, and it has to be a type of neder that's done publicly, so there's no way of having a taras nedarim. Now, it's interesting that this requirement of a neder only applies for Kohen violations, meaning if he were to marry a goy, which is not a Kohen violation, then he just has to divorce her. He doesn't have to make a neder, meaning the neder is miyuchad for violations of kahuna. If he's a Machal Shabbos, if he eats treif, if he even married a guy, he can be restored to those honors if he just does tshuva. And in the case of Chilul Shabbos, perhaps even if he's an active Shabbos violator, we're sometimes lenient and we allow it. Yeah.
I have two questions. The first question is, if at some point all of our souls chose this Derek, right? Why wouldn't Hashem allow, with our free will, to exercise a way to not follow the mitzvah? Chas Shalom, of course. But if somebody said, I don't want any of this anymore, it's too hard. Why wouldn't there be a path for that?
Well, there is a path for that. That's called free will. I mean, a person. See, this is a semantic mistake people make. People say free will means I can do whatever I want. Well, you have to differentiate between I can do and I may do, meaning free will doesn't mean there are no rules. Obviously, there are rules. The Torah says some things are okay, some things are not. So free will doesn't mean I'm allowed to do whatever I want. It just means I am able to do whatever I want. So if you're asking me, is there a path forward to throw away the Torah? The answer is there surely is a path forward. That's free will, and people do that. But that doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it justifiable. And that doesn't mean there are going to be no consequences. Free will never means that there are not going to be consequences for the decisions that you make. A person can decide to, murder people. No one's going to stop him, so to speak, but there are going to be consequences for those decisions. Okay. Yeah.
Can someone be excommunicated from the mitzvahs, from Judaism?
Can someone be excommunicated? Are you talking about by a congregation or by Hashem?
This question, both.
Yeah, we do have a whole institution called shiurim, excommunication, which is not so active today, or it's trivialized today, but it used to be a very, very big deal. Nobody would talk to you. Shunning, it's equivalent to the Amish having shunning. Nobody is within your 4 amos, but it's never for life. There's always the possibility of tshuva. This was Spinoza. Spinoza might be the real last apikoros. Most apikoros are just ignorant. You know the story. Most people don't know enough to be an apikoros. They told the story about a guy in Minsk who wanted to be an apikoros, and he was told, if you want to be an apikoros, you have to meet with Yassel the apikoros. He's the one that approves all new heretics. So he was looking around for Yassel. He went to inns, he went to casinos. Where do you look for? But finally, he comes to a Beis Medrash, and he sees an old man with a long white beard with a talus over his head. And he says, excuse me, I'm looking for Yassel the apikoros. He says, yeah, that's me. I'm Yassel. He says, well, you don't look like an apikoros so much. But he says, I want to join you. I want to be like you. So Yassel looks at him and says, have you finished Talmud? He says, well, no, I'm an apikoros. I don't believe in it. Do you know Chumash and Rashi? He says, no, I don't believe in it. So Yassel says, you're no apikoros, you're only ignorant. To be an apikoros, you got to know enough to then reject it. So one of the last real apikoroses was Benedict Spinoza, Baruch Spinoza. Spinoza was a very brilliant person. In the secular world, he is regarded as one of the great, great philosophers. But Spinoza was a heretic through and through. One of his famous books was to prove logically that the Torah is not from God, etc. And he goes through his different proofs. And Spinoza lived in Amsterdam. And he grew up as an Orthodox Jew, a religious Jew, and he was excommunicated. And in those days, they knew how to do excommunications. It's the sign, middle of the night. The big Amsterdam synagogue was filled with candles, but all of the elders wore black taluses, and they had 400 shofars, and they blow the shofars, and they put out all the lights, and in total darkness, they have this long proclamation. We have the wording. You can Google it. It says, Benedict Spinoza is forever expelled from the congregation of Israel. Unless he does tshuva, no one shall talk to him, no one shall have anything to do with him, etc. A long, long, long thing, a very frightening ceremony. And they blow 400 shofars in total darkness, even the taluses people are wearing. were black. So Spinoza did not recant his heresies. He remained an apikoros. He lived in Amsterdam. He mainly associated with Christians. And he died relatively young. He is considered to be a very brilliant philosopher, a very smart person. So I'll tell you this. A few years ago, it was the anniversary of his death or something, 400th anniversary. So they wanted to make a documentary. So the producer wanted to film the synagogue where Spinoza grew up in and was excommunicated. And the rabbi of the synagogue wouldn't let him in. The rabbi said, the shiurim against Spinoza is still in effect, so we cannot be involved in any type of program that honors him in any way. So he wouldn't let them film in the synagogue at all, because he said he's still in shiurim, even after all of these years. But there is movement among maybe the progressive wings of Judaism to rescind the shiurim against Benedict Spinoza. But as you say, shiurim was powerful. Now today it's been trivialized, because if you look at the wall posters all over Yerushalayim, everybody's always putting everybody in shiurim over very small things. Anyone that has a smartphone or is an iPhone is in shiurim. Or I even saw somebody who owned a hat store and somebody else owns another hat store, and he felt it was unfair competition. He says, I hereby decree, that person's in shiurim for opening up a hat store. So a very powerful institution that has really, really a lot of teeth to it has kind of become trivialized with all sorts of private fights. But I'll give you another example. If a man refuses to give a get after a beis din ordered him to do so, he can be put in shiurim for that. So that may or may not be effective. But the thing to know about shiurim is that it does not have to be permanent, and it can always be removed with tshuva. Yeah.
Where's the story of HaRav in Gemara that he was put in shiurim, and then every mayor, once he died, like came out of shiurim, or like stopped the smoke coming from his grave? Is that a special case for the mayor, only the mayor can do?
Yeah, that was a special case. And first of all, it doesn't really, the language of the Gemara does not say HaRav was put in shiurim as a formal matter. It just says that he was an apikoros, and he died as a heretic, and Rabbi Meir redeemed him from Gehenna. You see, Acher is the other one. We don't even mention his name. He has a name. He's Elisha ben Avuya. And Elisha ben Avuya was originally a Tana. He was a Tana. He was a great Torah scholar. He was the Rebbe of Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir continued to learn from him, even after he became a heretic. And people would ask Rabbi Meir, how can you learn from this person? And Rabbi Meir gave the famous mashal, he is like a pomegranate, I throw away the peel and I eat the seeds. Or like a peach, I throw away the pit and I eat the fruit. Interesting inside, outside, two different metaphors. And people use this, by the way, as an excuse. They want to go back to college, and they want to take Jewish studies courses, because you figure that's going to be an easy course for me. Jewish studies, right? I remember in Johns Hopkins reading a course description for Jewish studies. What did they say? It was a year-long course. So in the first semester, they cover the Bible and the Talmud and Kabbalah. They covered. I don't remember what they did for the second semester. But let's cover the whole Talmud and the Kabbalah and the Bible. We'll cover it in one semester, right? So you can imagine how thorough the treatment is. So a lot of yeshiva-educated people think that the easiest courses for them to take at college, called gut courses, would be Jewish studies. But Jewish studies are the most dangerous course, because that's where the most courses and the most heresy and the most ideas that are against the Torah are going to be promulgated. So these are courses you really should try to avoid. So people then say, well, what about Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Meir learned from Acher the heretic. Rabbi Meir took the good from the bad. So why can't I go to these courses and I'll take the good from the bad? And the short answer is, when you're Rabbi Meir, you can learn from Acher. When you're not Rabbi Meir, there's a lot of danger. There's a lot of danger in those courses, because there's so many things that are against what Judaism believes, that it's the worst course to take. It'd be better to take a math, a physics course, even a biology course, which deals with maybe evolution. That's one particular issue. But here, a Jewish studies course, the whole course is going to show you that the Torah is not divine and it's a product of different human historical periods and the like. Okay, I don't know how I got onto this at all, but okay. Yeah. Okay, so all right. So the first group of excluders here are those who don't know if they're, whose Judaism cannot be established. Then in verse Samach Aleph, 61, it talks about a family of kahuna, and they could not establish that they were Kohanim. They could establish that they're Jewish, but they could not prove they were Kohanim, so they were rejected, at least temporarily, from the priesthood. Now let's think about this halachically. There are many, many ways, a surprising number of ways, that a Kohen could in fact not be a Kohen. And here are the rules. There are certain women a Kohen cannot marry. What are the women? A Kohen cannot marry a divorced woman. A Kohen cannot marry a converted woman, a Gioris. A Kohen cannot marry a woman that has had sexual relations with a Gentile. And the fourth category, which means a Kohen can marry a non-virgin if she was not divorced and she had only relations with a Jew. Okay, this is a common mistake. People often think a Kohen can marry only a virgin. That is not MS. A Kohen Gadol can marry only a virgin, but we don't have Kohen Gadols today. Okay, so the three basic categories are Grusha, Gioris, and a woman that had sexual relations with a non-Jew, or, God forbid, incest. If a woman had relations with a brother or father, she could not marry a Kohen. Now, the halacha is, if a Kohen marries any of these forbidden women, so I already mentioned the halacha, he has to divorce her and take a vow, but he is a Kohen, he does not become pasul. However, the children that are born from that union are called chalal or chalalim. Chalal means a desecrated child, and they're not mamzerim, they can marry regular Jews, but there are two consequences. If they are male, they are no longer Kohanim. They are not Kohanim. A chalal is a Yisrael. And if they are female, they're called chalala, they're not allowed to marry a Kohen. A chalal can marry a bas Kohen. A chalala cannot marry a Kohen. So as a result, even if your father's a Kohen, even if your grandfather's a Kohen, whatever it would be, if at some point they married a divorced woman or a Gioris or a woman that had relations with a non-Jew, at that point, the kahuna line has stopped. So you can have 10 generations of people who thought they were Kohanim, when in fact, they were not Kohanim. That's why, among other things, the DNA marker to establish kahuna is absolutely meaningless. Right? There is a genetic marker that they have that can show that a given person is a descendant from Aaron. On the male side, if it would only be female, that wouldn't mean anything, but now that you are a male descendant of Aaron. So the issue is, can that DNA marker establish a Kohen status? The answer is obviously not. In fact, I'll give you a more extreme example. Let's imagine a Kohen marries not a Gioris, a Kohen marries a non-Jewish woman. So the kid that he has is not only not a Kohen, the kid that he has is a Goy. But that Goy will have the genetic marker of being a descendant on his father's side from Aaron. So that's one thing. the genetic marker might identify a guy as a Kohen, and moreover, when you factor in divorced women, giores, and women that have relations with a guy or incest, once again, the fact that you are a male, that on your male line you have an unbroken DNA marker, cannot establish kahuna status at all. The only question is, so that's called a false positive, meaning the positive identification is false. On the other hand, it might be a true negative, meaning to say the following. The presence of the marker cannot establish kahuna. But it might be, this is where you get a machlokes, the absence of the marker might be evidence that you're not a Kohen, right? So that's called a false positive and a true negative. So that's a machlokes in halacha. Do we rely on this statistical evidence for any purpose? Some will not. Others will say we can use it to negate kahuna, but we certainly cannot use it to establish kahuna. Now, again, I don't want to digress into, so many interesting halachic byways, but this is a major, major issue for Kohanim, especially if they're Bali Tshuva, they're a little bit older, and they want to get married. Now, the problem is that in this day and age, most people, if they're not from, are sexually active. So the issue is, if you have a 30-year-old Kohen who wants to date, let's say, women in the range of 25 to 30, I'm just making up a number, are they allowed to assume that the woman that they're dating is kosher to marry a Kohen? Because remember, even if she's not divorced, even if she was never married, and even if she's not a Gioris, those are simple. But the issue is, did the woman have sexual relationship with a non-Jew? Because if she had sexual relationships with a non-Jew, she cannot marry a Kohen. And if the Kohen married her, the kids would not be Kohanim, they would be Chalalim. So again, I'm not giving you a psak halach. If anyone has a shayla, they should discuss it with the Rav. But there are some rabbis, particularly in Israel, and maybe it's unfair stereotyping, who actually take a very absolutist position. They basically say that any woman who is more than 25 years old, who was not religious when she went to college, a Kohen cannot marry. That's all. Kohen cannot marry. They make an automatic thing. Rav Moshe Feinstein, this is a long time ago, took an opposite approach. Rav Moshe Feinstein said that all women are presumed to be b'cheskas kashrus. Until you know there's a problem, you put them on a status quo that they are kosher to marry a Kohen, and you don't have to investigate. Now, what that means, though, is if the woman herself knows her situation, if the woman is a frum woman and she knows she was with a guy, she cannot date a Kohen. But the Kohen doesn't have to ask questions, meaning the Kohen can put her on a cheskas kashrus and marry her, but certainly that's not a heter for her to go through with something that she knows is improper. Okay, so Lamaisa in the United States, generally speaking, in most of the world, other than parts of Eretz Yisrael, the psak is that we put people on a cheskas kashrus. But there's another way of approaching it, and that is, sometimes we can find out that the Kohen is not a Kohen. In other words, the way you get around the problem, a Kohen cannot marry this woman, is, already, who says you're a Kohen? So I'll give you an actual case that these are friends of mine, and I was involved a little bit. This guy, imagine a Kohen who was raised not religious. He was totally not religious. And he married a non-Jewish woman, not a Gioris. He married a non-Jewish woman. Intermarriage. He had 5 children from a non-Jewish woman. They're all Goyim. So far, you have a Goyish family, that's all. A Jewish guy who married a non-Jewish woman has 5 Goyish children. What happened was, she got to be interested in Judaism. And she was exploring Judaism, and she wanted to become more and more religious, and she wanted to undergo an Orthodox conversion. and have her minor children be converted as well, because she was becoming Shomeres Shabbos, Kashrus, and the like. So they go before a Beis Din. Now, do you see the problem the Beis Din has? In order to convert a person, they have to accept the mitzvos. One of the mitzvos is a Kohen cannot marry a convert. Now, the truth is, a Kohen cannot marry a Goy either, but that's not a conversion issue. If they're living with a Goy, so they're just not keeping halacha. But if she wants to become Jewish, she has to accept all of the Torah, including the rule that a Kohen cannot be with the Gioris, which Chazal learn out from Drashas. So the Beis Din said, we have to consult with a Gadol or Moshe Feinstein, whatever it is. But the Beis Din told her, we have to alert you to the possibility that if we convert you, are you willing to leave your husband, if that is the halacha? So they asked her the question separately. She broke down crying, and she said, if this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has asked of me, I will make that sacrifice. This is a true Gioris, L'Shem Shemayim. They called in her husband, who was not really that religious at that time at all. And when they said to the husband, we will convert your wife, but she may have to leave you, he stormed out. He said, you rabbis are just crazy. And, so this was a difficult situation. But they asked Rav Moshe Feinstein, and listen to what Rav Moshe Feinstein said. She'll be a Gioris who cannot marry a Kohen, that's for sure. But Rav Moshe says, how does the husband know that he's a Kohen? His father told him. Is his father Shomer Shabbos? No. So Rav Moshe Feinstein said that in order to establish someone as a Kohen, you have to have halachically valid evidence from someone that's kosher to testify. And the Mechal Shabbos is not kosher to testify. So as a result, his Kohen status cannot be established. And if his Kohen status cannot be established, we simply define him by the majority of Jews. Most Jews are not Kohanim. So if you don't know if you're a Kohen or not, because halachically there is no evidence that's valid to establish you as a Kohen, you can assume you're a Yisrael, and therefore even if your wife is a Gioris, you can stay married. This was Rav Moshe's tshuva. Now what's interesting is, so they converted, and the husband came from, the kids became from, and they converted. Baruch Hashem, the family is a beautiful family. But what's interesting is that the man's father, who's not religious, still considered himself a Kohen. I don't think the son ever explained the issue. So when the father would visit them, he would get in Aliyah, the first Aliyah, and the son would get a third Aliyah, whatever it would be. But that means the son did not duchen, the son was not a Kohen. And he would often tell me that he does have nightmares that when Mashiach comes and all of these questions are going to be clarified, he will discover to his shock and disappointment that he's a Kohen and he's not allowed to be with his wife. But my answer to him was that Hashem would not allow Rav Moshe to make a psak that would be untrue. So these are two different avenues, meaning there are two issues you confront as a Kohen. One is the woman I'm dating kosher to marry a Kohen? But then the saving grace might be, you're not a Kohen. Now, Rav Moshe's psak was very, very popular. I got a call from a Beis Din in New York that said they don't understand. They're getting like 100 calls a week about Kohanim who want to have, they want to be disenfranchised as Kohanim. He says, I heard that Rav Moshe gave us a way to get out of being a Kohen. And the Dayan said, I don't know why people want to get out of being a Kohen. Being a Kohen is such an honor. But the answer is they heard Rav Moshe's point. But the emphasis, Rav Moshe's point was a shas hatchak for a very emergency extenuating circumstance. This was an already married couple with 5 children. So to simply say you got to get divorced, that's a big, big issue, shalom bayis and raising children. But we certainly don't use that leniency if you're just deciding who you want to date. I'm a Kohen, I'd like to enlarge my dating pool to include divorced women and converts. So, I only know I'm a Kohen from non-religious relatives. In other words, you're not going to use that just to allow dating. This was a miyuchad, very special heter for existing marriages where there are children, and divorce would be an extreme hardship. So you can't really take the leniency as far as people would like to take it. Yeah.
Isn't there a halacha that a ger, or like a grusha, that they can't marry any Jew that they were with while they were still a Kohen? Isn't there a halacha like that?
Oh, you're talking about they cannot marry. They cannot marry a Jew that they were with.
That they were with while they were a Kohen.
There is such a halacha, but the Posek give different reasons why we don't follow that today. Because if you think about this, the standard protocol for intermarriage and tshuva is that the non-Jew converts, and then we have a kosher marriage for them. I mean, that's what you do, right? That's the optimal way, that the family is not for him. And you are correct. Technically, that seems to violate the rule that a Jew is not allowed to marry the non-Jew that they were with, even if the non-Jew converts. And yet, halachically, we are making on that today. Yeah, there are heterim, and those heterim are commonly followed. I mean, that's how it is. I mean, often, kosher weddings are done the very same day of the conversion, right? The non-Jew converts to Judaism, and right afterwards we have a chuppah, so she and her husband, Jewish husband, or vice versa, can be married. So that halacha kind of we don't really follow that much. Yeah.
What happens if later on it was found out that he was in fact?
Yeah. So as I say, that's gonna be a great, great tragedy. They would have to get divorced. They would have to get divorced at that time because a Kohen who marries a divorced woman has to divorce her. Now, or Gioris. Now, let me mention that there is only one psul. There is one forbidden marriage where once the Kohen does it, he can stay married. Now, this is very fascinating. And this is an unknown psul because it's buried in a very obscure part of the Shulchan Aruch. And that is a woman whose father is not Jewish. Right? Non-Jewish father, Jewish mother. The girl is a Jew. The girl is a Jew. 100% Jew. She's not a Gioris. But rabbinically, she is not allowed to marry a Kohen. But, interestingly enough, once they got married, let's say they didn't tell the rabbi, whatever it is, once they got married, they are allowed to stay married. Now, this is absolutely unique. This is not true for anything else. If a Kohen marries a divorced woman, got to get divorced. If a Kohen marries a Gioris, they got to get divorced. If a Kohen marries a woman that was with a guy, they got to get divorced. The only exception to this rule is if a Kohen marries a girl whose father is not Jewish, b'di'evet, they are allowed to stay married. It's a very unique halacha that I think applies to no other forbidden marriage. Yeah.
How do we track like the yichus of a kohen? How do we know we have any good kohanim nowadays? And if it's a doubt, then how do we do mitzvahs like Tikkun Abed?
Yeah. So the short answer is we actually don't know, except for some rare families. There are, if you know the name Rappaport. Rappaport is a famous Kohen family name. And they say the Rappaports can trace themselves all the way back. But most Kohanim are Suffolk Kohanim for sure. And the only thing is, for duchening, we allow them to duchen because even if you're not a Kohen, but you're not doing necessarily a big Aveira, being called first to the Torah, those things. But for example, one of the reasons why we don't give truma to people today is because we're not sure you're a Kohen. When the Beis Medrash is going to be built, the standards are going to be very, very tough. You're going to have to come up with proof. I'm not sure exactly where you'll get the proof. But to work in the temple, you can't just walk in and say, hey, I'm a Kohen. You really have to have some documented proof. But for our things, we can be fairly lenient. Now, in terms of Pidyon Haben, it is recorded that the Vilna Gaon had a Bechor, his oldest child was a son, and it says for his whole life, every time he met a Kohen, he gave 5 Salayim for Pidyon Haben because he was never sure that it was redeemed. He gave it to 100 Kohanim, but who knows?
How did that Rappaport family have? Did they have like a document or something?
They have family trees. So Rappaport is Mishpacha Miyucheses. There are a few Mishpachot Miyuchatot, but as I say, most Kohanim are considered to be what are called Kohanei Chazaka, meaning we assume they're Kohanim. We don't know for sure. And for Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, you would need a much stronger level of evidence. And that is kind of what is going on in the book of Ezra when it says they could not find the family trees that established their lineage, and therefore they were disqualified from kahuna, and that primarily means eating truma and doing avoda in the temple that's going to be reconstructed very soon. Okay, we'll stop here.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.